Warning, I'm going to sort of push the envelope on ideas that I don't necessarily, some of them I endorse 100%, but some of them I don't necessarily endorse, but I think are worthy of consideration, even though, as a further caveat, I'm going outside of my expertise and talking about time and physics and things that I also don't really understand. So I'm presenting ideas that I don't necessarily endorse and may not entirely understand. But hope that doesn't bother you. All right. But having said that, let me begin with some things that I am very persuaded of. And this is the privileged knowledge from a first-person perspective. So I start from my own, looking out of my own two eyes, and I ask myself, what do I know simply as a basis or from my own experience? And there are two essential truths that seem to me to be just absolutely a necessary quality of my experience. The first, of course, is that I have experience. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. This seems to me to be absolutely irrefutable. I am participating in experience. And let me give you a thought experiment, which will work for many of you. I see Ted is already shaking his head. So here's the thought experiment. You get together a blue ribbon panel of the greatest brain scientists who have ever lived, and they have the Manhattan Project, and they come up with a qualia machine, and they're able to tell what has first-person experience, what has subjective experience, and what doesn't. And they're absolutely persuaded. They've published their work in Science, and everyone is in agreement that this is a fine machine. And they take this machine, and they plop it on your head, and they shake their head, and they say, "I'm sorry, I've got some very bad news for you. You think you have subjective experience, but you don't. It's a mistake. In fact, our machine definitively says you are a zombie, you have no internal experience." Would you accept their conclusion? Anything else that they told you, I think you would accept, but that I think you would reject. You would go, "No, go back, your machine's wrong. I know I have experience, and I don't care what science says." And this is my opinion. I think that for me, no matter what science tells me, I know that I have subjective experience. The second thing, and I'm perhaps not quite as persuaded about this as I am about subjective experience, but it's up there. When I think about what subjective experience is, it is change. It is the flow of time. What experience is it is the movement of moment to moment to moment to moment. That is what constitutes my experience. So I'm arguing that the two things that I find absolutely most compelling are experience and flow of time. I could be a brain in a vat. This could all be some sort of, dream, but these two things still remain. And the problem is that the prevailing paradigm has no explanation for how it is that subjective experience arises, and insists that the flow of time is an illusion. And so herein lies the rub. Science provides absolutely no way of conceptualizing the two things of which I am most certain. And for me, this is a humbling thing. It suggests that we need to be cautious in assuming that science has got it all wrapped up, that it's just sort of filling, crossing the T's and dotting the I's. I think there may be something really much more fundamental that is missing from science, because it is set up in such a way that the two things that seem absolutely transparently clear either are entirely inexplicable or explicitly characterized as being an illusion. So let me just briefly go through these two issues. First is the arising of subjective experience. How is it that this 3-pound meatloaf produces a experience? As David Chalmers observes, why doesn't all this information processing go on in the dark, free of any inner feel? Why is it that when electromagnetic waveforms impinge on our retina and are discriminated and categorized by a visual system, this discrimination and categorization experiences a sensation of vivid red? We know that conscious experience does arise when these functions are performed, but the very fact that it arises is the central mystery. How is it that subjective experience arises is just absolutely, no one has really got. Churchill say that it's all going to be sorted out, but there's really, no one has a clue as to how that problem is going to be revealed. The problem of time is equally challenging. Physics offers no account for the flow of time. I didn't realize this until somewhat recently. Einstein said, "The past, the present, and the future are all illusions, even if stubborn ones." And theoretical physicist Paul Davies says, nothing in known physics corresponds to the passage of time. Indeed, physicists insist that time doesn't flow at all, it merely is. And this is, other physicists, this is a standard view. And you may ask, well, that doesn't make sense. It's obvious that time flows. Well, the reason why physicists don't believe that there is a flow of time is because they think about time as equivalent to another dimension of space. So this is the block universe. It's kind of hard to see in this lighting, but basically the idea is that every moment corresponds to another slice in time. And so the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously. And this leads to this very hard problem, because how can you move through time if movement, in fact, requires time? And Paul Davies puts this very well, I think. He says, but what meaning can be attached to the movement of time itself? Relative to what does it move? Whereas other types of motion relate one physical process to another, the putative flow of time relates time to itself. Posing the simple question, how fast does time pass, exposes the absurdity of the very idea. The trivial answer is 1 second per second tells us nothing at all. And so he concludes basically that from the fixed past to the tangible present to the undecided future, it feels as though time flows inexorably on, but that is an illusion. So here it is, this absolutely fundamental aspect of our existence, the flow of time, we have to just accept as being an illusion. So what I want to pose, and again this is as a speculation, but I think we need to keep these things on the table because there's a real problem here, is that consciousness might provide the missing degree of freedom, that consciousness may actually have some sort of fundamental aspect in nature, and that provides the degree of freedom to move through this block universe. And I'm not the first to suggest this. Physicist Andre Linde, who just won one of those multi-million-dollar prizes, suggested, is it possible that consciousness, like space-time, has its own intrinsic degree of freedom, and that neglecting these will lead to a description of the universe that is fundamentally incomplete? So a major physicist speculating that consciousness may have some sort of fundamental aspect in nature. And similarly, David Chalmers observes, I propose that conscious experience be considered a fundamental feature irreducible to anything more basic. If existing fundamental theories cannot encompass it, then something new is required. So what might that new thing be? Again, this is just to try to keep the options open, but I think that this is plausible, is that perhaps experience corresponds to an additional dimension of subjective time that provides the degree of freedom necessary to enable consciousness to move through physical time. In other words, in the block universe, you can't move because there's only one dimension of time. There's no degree of freedom to move. You need to be able to move in physical time relative to something else in order to have movement. So if there were another dimension, if there were a subjective dimension, so you're moving in physical time relative to subjective time, that could possibly provide the room to have a genuine flow of time. So here is my depiction of that. So what I'm going to do is first show you an event, pretty straightforward event. So here is an event, and now what I want to do is to take that event and turn it into a block universe. Here's that event. This is that same event as a block universe, and there's no motion. It's just absolutely static. This is the way that physics thinks about that event. And the question is, how can we add? How can it unfold if we add another dimension of time? So time currently is being taken up by this physical thing, but if we add a second dimension, then all of a sudden it unfolds in a natural way. So now by allowing for a second dimension, so we're now moving through time, but it's subjective time relative to objective time. Now all of a sudden it unfolds. And this also provides a present. So now we actually have a vector in objective time which provides for the present. So my basic argument then is that I am my experience. Experience may be an essential property of the physical universe rather than a byproduct of neural systems, and therefore I am not necessarily my brain. And to just bring this back to the theme of this meeting, I think that part of the problem right here is that science is forcing a particular metaphysical or a particular interpretation about the nature of our experience that has consequences, as we talked about earlier. When you tell people that they have no free will, or that they're just a pack of neurons, they're more likely to cheat. It can influence their own sense of themselves, potentially in negative ways. We find a whole lot of correlations between belief and free will and a whole variety of positive qualities. So I think we need to be very cautious in just asserting that absolutely incontrovertibly science shows that you're nothing but your brain, particularly given that there are problems with the current worldview that are not straightforwardly resolved. Thank you.